Hey everyone, welcome back to Secured App. As always, this is your host and host Kunal, and today we are with Abhinav Gupta. Abhinav Gupta is an assistant professor of law and doctoral researcher at National Law School of India, Ranchi, where his PhD focuses on regulation of crypto, a study with an academic foundation that combines law, technology, including LLM in business law from NLSIU, a PhD in a postgraduate diploma in French, multidisciplinary perspective to contemporary legal issues. His area of interest, law and technology, are commendable. So before moving further to Abhinav Gupta, I will just introduce myself. I'm Kunal Chaudhary, Marketing Associate at Secured App, and today with us we have an immense full personality, Mr. Abhinav Gupta. So without wasting any further time, I would just like to welcome you, Professor. We are absolutely honored that you joined our session and you will be sharing your insights today. And we look forward to that. Thank you for joining. And if you can just introduce yourself in a short intro where you can just tell about your experience and all that, it would be better for our audience.
Absolutely. First of all, thank you so much, Kunal, for inviting me. I'm delighted to be here. And I thank Secure Apps for having invited me for this webinar. He has, very beautifully and, very graciously already introduced me. I'll just simply add a couple of things. I am a doctoral researcher who is doing in crypto regulation. I have teaching experience of almost 8 years, and I am a technology and law enthusiast, and I'm very excited how the world is evolving. So hopefully, during the conversation, we'll be able to come out with something more important. Thank you. Thank you, Kunal. Over to you.
Absolutely, Professor. We will be doing some interesting conversation for our audience. So we will start with the question that comes to my mind is digital trust meant something very important when IT Act 2000 was enacted. So I want to know from your perspective, how was the idea of trust itself evolved in India's digital ecosystem by 2025 or by 2026 that we are heading to?
Right. It's a very interesting question. Going back to year 2000, and I'll take you a little, behind that because, the act came in 2000, but then there was a lot of work which happened in 1990s. So way back in time, 1993, we had internet. So, it was not something what, we are able to have converse, virtual space and easily communication. That was not there. So internet itself, the World Wide Web itself was publicly available somewhere around 1993. It was available in India by 1995. So it was the journey for, digital trust is something which has come much late, to be very honest. So there was a preliminary stage because the internet came in 1995. And first proposal to have something to regulate internet or cyberspace in India for its citizens was somewhere around 1998 when the prime minister scientific advisor he came out with set of points highlighting one of the points to regulate cyberspace. By 1999 we had that information technology bill and the act of 2000. So prior to 2000 or information technology act 2000, the digital trust was broadly looked at from perspective of technology and service which was being accessible over world wide web, which was broadly true. One was electronic commerce. And you'll be surprised to know the IT Act was actually established or enacted purely for promoting e-commerce, and then obviously e-governance and so on. But the prime reason was e-commerce, and then obviously electronic communication, broadly emails and other set of communication. Now, the era from 2000 to 2010 was very interesting. We were just focusing on cybersecurity, right? How to protect the cyberspace which we had. And for the same, we used the regulatory framework in form of Information Technology Act. So digital trust broadly revolved around protecting an individual in a cyberspace, right? But then things started to change substantially post 2010 because then we have a transition from third industrial revolution to fourth industrial revolution, which was very
Mm,
interesting because this fourth industrial revolution was broadly a technological revolution. So digital revolution, third industrial revolution, shifting to a technological revolution, and there, beginning of blockchain, beginning of AI, and so on, big data, cloud computing on a large scale started happening. And here, the real evolution or requirement of digital trust started. So that's what broadly you are able to see. So from there, we have the requirement of digital trust slowly starting to increase. However, I'm still reluctant to say that it importance in India, because when you look at Indian society, and I'm sure we have lived in our, joint families, concept
Mhm.
of privacy and lack of trust does not exist. We
Absolutely.
blindly trust people, right? Concept of privacy for us does not exist. Still, even in 2026, many of us who are living in joint families, there's no concept of privacy. We still have tendency to trust even a stranger, right? And that is in physical space, and sometimes we do the same in cyberspace. Best example, digital arrest. You're able to see why people are willing, you know even educated postgraduate individuals with, having done job in IT firms, they are being victim of digital trust because they have innate requirement to trust, right? Now there comes digital trust, how to protect that, right? So from that perspective, post 2020, so from 2010 to 2020, it's a dynamic sphere. And then 2020, there was a revolution of next generation of AI, broadly generative AI. By 2022, we have Chat GPT, and now we are already talking about artificial agents. So from that perspective, digital trust has substantially evolved from purely technical to an hybrid system of technical techno legal, right? Where it's not just the technology which will be able to facilitate or provide digital trust, but there is a requirement of a regulatory framework, which I'm sure we are able to see with respect to DPDPA rules.
Hmm.
We are already talking about, repealing IT Act and coming out with a new act in form of Digital India Act. So that's what broadly is my perspective. I'm able to look at from that perspective.
Absolutely. That was an immense piece of knowledge that you shared, and many facts that you shared was really non-negotiable for the community that we are talking about. So, Professor, we were talking about a decade ahead. So, following up to that question, what were the biggest digital defects in India when we talk about back a decade, India's digital infrastructure, and which of those gaps have genuinely narrowed today when we are sitting in 2026?
Right. Again, a very important question for us because uh, I don't know how many of us are aware or would remember, 10 years back. Let's go back 10 to 11 years back in time, right? The BJP government, the India government had just come in, right? And they come out with a very unique scheme, JAM scheme, if you remember, Jan Dhan, Aadhaar and Mobile, right?
Yes, absolutely.
In 2016, they came out with unified UPI, which we used in our daily life in 2006 to 16. And the same year, so somewhere around mid of August, September, they came out with UPI, and November they had demonetization,
Hmm.
right? And at the same time, if you would remember, interestingly, September 5th of 2016, we had a public launch of Geo. And prior to Geo, so that's almost like 10 years, right? 10 to 12 years. Now, why I've highlighted this, because we have to understand prior to this, and I'm speaking purely from Indian perspective. From Indian perspective, you have to understand that we were not so conscious about cyberspace or for that matter, digital trust because our presence of digital sphere was absolutely minimal. How did it evolve? It was geo revolution of 2016, right? And the government policies of jam, UPI, demonetization gave a big push. Now, because of that, what happened? Even a rickshaw wala nowadays, without demeaning them, obviously they are performing their business.
Yeah,
Rickshaw
absolutely.
wala or auto wala or a vegetable person. Please try and understand. Everyone has a digital presence, and therefore the requirement of digital trust has substantially increased. The reason is we are generating so much of data, and we don't have data centers in India. Where is the data going? What's happening to their data? Who's analyzing it? Who's processing it? After being processed, what's happening to it? I hope we are able to understand. So, a journey
Absolutely.
which began 10 to 12 years ago with the government policies and certain, commercial activities taking place, Geo, has given such a big platform. And the regulatory framework which we had. was just Section 43 of the Information Technology Act, which was not sufficient enough. Obviously, 43A with SPDI rules. Now, over a period of time, as we are able to see, we are closer to thinking. I'm still very insistent. We are just thinking. We have come out with DPDPA, we have come out with DPDPA rules. We are still almost 2 years away from its implementation. So we have started thinking of the importance of the data which we are generating and the requirement of holding our own data in India itself. So there has been a regulatory shift, and the corporates have realized it. They cannot do it anymore. So slowly you will be able to see there are a lot of data centers which are opening in India, right? Because we don't want our data going out, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Specifically personal data, right? So DPDPA and DPDPA rules will go a long way. It's not yet begun, to be very honest. I'm not being skeptic, but then, as we already know, we are great at making laws, which is absolutely poor at implementing them. So keeping our fingers crossed, hoping we are able to execute what we have been able to generate.
Absolutely. Fingers crossed here. Okay, Professor, do you think digital trust in India has transitioned from being primarily technology led to being law led, or uh, is it still in an uneasy balance between the two?
All right. See, when we talk purely about digital trust, it's broadly a technical term. It's not a legal term, very honestly. So specifically, if we limit to digital trust, obviously we are trying to understand it from the perspective of DPDPA, but then still, when we talk about digital trust, it's a technical term. It will always and always will be technology led. We have to understand. However, having said that, the Justice Puttaswamy judgment, which has brought in right to privacy, and the right to privacy is not limited to physical sphere, but even cyberspace, right? So therefore, the element of digital trust kicks in. But the bigger problem from 2017 to now has been that at that point of time when we talked about privacy, we said, the biggest problem is attribution. I don't know whether the person who is speaking on the other side, if I switch off my camera, is actually Abhinav Gupta, right? But the problem now it stands is, even with the camera on, how could you say it's me? And it's not a deep fake AI agent version of me. I hope you're able to understand. So it's earlier
Absolutely.
it was who is that person? Now I don't even know who's the person other side, whether it's a natural person, real person, or an AI deepfake. So the situation has completely changed. The digital trust requirement have absolutely changed, and therefore the beginning of synthetic content and there is a draft regarding changes in intermediary guidelines and other things specifically relating to uh, tagging of synthetic content has become extremely important. So from attribution to AI agent, the things have substantially changed. So the law obviously has to be on its toes, but then at the same time also ensure that it does not kill the technology.
Absolutely. First of all, Professor, the way you are explaining, it's really very interesting to hear from you, because this kind of explanation can only be circulated from a person who is himself so much of knowledgeable on this sector, right? So
Thank you so
it's
much.
a pleasure. It's a pleasure talking to you, Professor. Also,
Sure.
coming back to tech, early IT laws were centered on cybercrime and electronic records, right? What key moments or pressures pushed Indian law toward data protection and privacy instead?
Right. So it's I already highlighted that as an Indian society, we do not have that thinking of seeking privacy. That's one. We'll always remember that as and when we discuss, because that's important. Now, the real beginning for data protection and privacy, it's undeniable. It was by Justice Puttaswamy, right? So retired Justice K.S. Puttaswamy, who was a retired judge from Karnataka High Court, he filed a writ in Supreme Court against the Aadhaar, right? That Aadhaar should not be made mandatory for the purpose of subsidies and other things. So that was the beginning of it, and we cannot deny it. So something what began in 2012, and obviously by 2017 we had a nine judges bench, which came out and said that right to privacy is a fundamental right under Part 3 in general and Article 21 in specific, right? Now, This was actually the beginning, and parallelly, since the Supreme Court had already given directions to the government, so government had parallelly before the judgment came. So judgment came on 24th of August 2017. Somewhere in July, there was a expert body committee which was established under the chairmanship of retired Justice B.N. Sri Krishna, right? So B.N. Sri Krishna had come out with a white paper. He did, a tour all across the India, discussing about it, and then came out with his report in 2018. So the beginning was with the Justice K.S. Puttaswamy judgment, and then the committee, which had wide publicity, which was given wide publicity, it was something which led to government create a law for India. In addition to what was happening in India, I should also highlight that at global level, in Europe, we just had GDPR. So GDPR was enacted in 2016, and then 2 years moratorium was there, and from 2018, April 2018, it came into force, right? So all that was parallelly happening, which made really government to think about having a law relating to privacy and data protection. But I must highlight that although we do have a DPDPA, but we are still at least 20 years behind, when it comes to privacy and data protection in India in comparison to developed nations like US and Europe.
Okay, so we are so much behind. Okay, so moving ahead, Professor, we talked about cybercrime.
Correct.
So, which past cyber incidents or data breaches do you believe was the most influenced one that shaped India's current data protection framework?
Right. It's a very interesting question, but then I really have to confess that most of the cyber incidences and the cyber crime which actually take place are usually not reported, are usually not publicly disclosed. Now, the big question is why they are not reported, why they are not public disclosed. You have to understand there's an element of shame, there's an element of loss of reputation, there's an element of economic cost. If I go out, or for that matter, there is any company ABCD that comes out and said, yes, we have been victim of a cyber incident, would you feel comfortable to share your personal data with that organization again? The answer obviously would be no,
No.
right? Because a prudent man would not do that. So from that perspective, whenever a cybercrime or cyber incident take place, it's usually not publicly disclosed. And then you have to come forward and say, but sir, many times we do hear in news items that this incident happened, that incident happened. But I'm sorry to say, those incidents would have happened year or 2 years back, and they are being disclosed now. So from that perspective, we have to understand that the data breaches, which or these happen, they are not disclosed, and even when disclosed, they are disclosed a lot later. The best examples have been Aadhaar breaches and the bank data, the payment gateways. But the one which really hits me is somewhere around 2020. It was Ames Delhi. If you remember the ransomware attack, that was huge because Ames Delhi, right in the heart of the Delhi, the biggest government hospital in the nation, was a victim of a ransomware attack. The government put every resources that it had to protect it, but they could not.
Okay. And that was dangerous as well because
Yeah,
Ames is the
absolutely. Yes, yes, patient data, and can't even imagine. But anyways,
okay. Professor, coming back to DPDP, do you see DPDP Act as the natural evolution of IT Act framework, or does it represent a fundamental shift in how the state views data and trust?
right. So from this perspective, first of all, when the IT Act came and when the DPDPA came, are completely two different landscape altogether, right? Because when IT Act came, to be very honest, it was in 2000 and it was a special law because we had no law regulating cyberspace. We didn't even understood at that point of time what is cyberspace, right? Now, from 2020 to 2026, the timeline we are able to see within cyberspace, there are several specialized areas, right? One of them is data. So IT Act is so from that perspective, a special law, IT Act for cyberspace becomes a general law. Now, in that general law, we are looking at data. And please try and understand, DPDPA does not cover data as a whole. It only limits to personal data. It does not deal with non-personal data, which we rarely speak about, right? Because there was a Krishna committee way back in 2020 again, where it talked about the relevance of non-personal data and, requirement of regulating that as well, right? So even in cyberspace, what DPDPA is doing, it's just regulating personal data, not data altogether, not even commercial data. So from that
Got it.
perspective, it cannot be said that it's a completely different regulation altogether, more of a specialized law within cyberspace.
Okay. So, how does DPDP Act reflect in India's evolving future and understanding of privacy as a fundamental right rather than just a compliance obligation? You talked
Right.
about privacy earlier as well.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And I'll keep answers short because I've already spoken about it. So very simplistically, retired Justice K.S. Puttaswamy versus Union of India 2017 Supreme Court, it declared right to privacy as a fundamental right. Now, interestingly, although it was a huge judgment, almost 400, 500 pages, but interestingly, could not define what privacy means. So you have
Mhm.
obviously talked about several authors and scholars talking about privacy means this, privacy means this. But then the judgment itself was not able to come out and tell, oh, for India or for regulatory framework, this is what privacy means, right? But they said right to privacy is a fundamental right, which was extremely hilarious at the same time interesting as well. Now, what does DPDPA says? So DPDPA talks about what does it mean, what is protected under privacy, and what remedies are available to you if your privacy is breached. So that's how, Justice KS Puttaswamy and DPDP are different. So it said we have a right, but what does it mean? What does the right means? What is protected under it, and what do you do in case of a breach is broadly what DPDP is. I've just tried to
Absolutely.
keep it as crisp as possible.
Absolutely. And when general public talk about privacy, we know that okay, we have Article 21 in our Constitution. That's what privacy is. But the privacy is so deeper to be discussed. So that is
Absolutely,
something.
absolutely. And you would be
So
surprised to know privacy as a concept goes back to Aristotle.
okay,
It goes back to Aristotle. Aristotle talked about privacy. Can you imagine? So it's not a new concept. Although for India it didn't exist, but then when you look at as a whole, Aristotle was the first person who spoke about privacy. Obviously not directly. Privacy as a term itself came much later, but then yes.
okay, this was an unknown fact for me, but today I know about it. So uh, we are talking about Aristotle, professor. So historically, individuals had very limited control over their data, right? So
Yes.
has the DPDP Act meaningfully changed the power of imbalance, or is the control still largely to the institution that we earlier had?
No, it is expected, it's still in the process of implementation, but it's really expected to change the scenario. So that's the transition. That's so, as an individual, you and me, we become data principals for DPDPA. Now, as a data principal, it becomes very, very, there are several rights which have been given to us. Our personal data cannot be used without our consent. We have to be given notice. We will have right to access our own data. We can update and, even delete our data. So these are very interesting autonomy and authority power which has been given to a data principal, and corresponding liability has also been put on data fiduciaries, that if a data fiduciary who is collecting a personal data, processing a personal data, and is not able to fulfill the requirement of data principle, then accordingly there is liability as well which can be imposed on the data fiduciary. So certainly, if the law as it stands today is implemented effectively, I think the situation will change. The data principal will have lot of autonomy and will lot of authority over its own data.
Absolutely. Professor, moving further in our show, moving further in our next segment, rather. So, talking about consent, has India truly moved from the implied consent towards the informed and granular choice, or it is still on consent, still more theoretical than practical?
Right. So whether it will be practical, we'll have to wait and watch, very honestly. right? Because we are yet to implement it, how effectively the consent managers are working, how effectively the data protection officers are functioning, how data fiduciaries are being held liable by data protection authorities. That is something which you'll have to wait and watch. But then, as the law stands today, Section 6 of DPDPA, it categorically provides that a consent is required to be free, specific, informed, unconditional, and unambiguous. So, from that perspective, the Section 6 clearly provides that it has to be explicit, clear, and there cannot be a second speck of doubt. And therefore, the aspect of consent managers have come up, which is a very interesting concept, which puts an additional liability on data fiduciary and also permits the data principal to check that whether his consent is being complied with or not.
Absolutely. So, Professor, talking about corporate thinking, how have you seen corporate thinking evolve from viewing data purely as an asset to treating it as a long-term responsibility tied to trust?
Right. I should confess that right away that in India, corporates have been exploiting the data which they have been collecting for years. The big four, we know Apple, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, we already know. So the corporate mindset spending has been data maximization and asset accumulation. Now, why they want to do it? They want to profile people, they want to advertise, they want to do product development, research and development, and so on. So for that purpose, they require data, and they absolutely do not care about an individual. For them, an individual is nothing more than a set of data which will help them develop a product or commercially, maximize everything. So from that perspective, uh, just a second, I have an urgent call. Just can you give me a minute? Would that be
Sure,
possible?
sure, 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 sure. Please take your time.
Yeah. Sorry, there was an urgent call, right? So
No,
from
please.
that perspective, corporations, they are not bothered about individuals. They are bothered about money. They're running for profit. The only restriction which is coming over a period of time is, if you do not protect or you do not provide sufficient. In fact, just to give a simple example, how Apple is selling itself. Apple is saying our devices protect your privacy. They're their USP. Can you imagine? The USP of a company is we are protecting your privacy. Now, what they're doing through this, they're developing a reputation. Now, they are doing nothing. Can an Apple phone be hacked? Absolutely yes. Can it be hacked? Absolutely yes. It might be little more difficult than other phones, but then absolutely it can be hacked. But then they're putting an idea, that Apple means privacy, reputation. There is a global expectation which is coming up. As an individual, we are also feeling, I need to have digital trust, my data and my personality, everything should be protected. And obviously, over a period of time, we have regulatory, compliances which have come up. But these corporates are just not bothered about individuals. They're bothered about money, and there is no second thought about it.
Absolutely. So we often see when we are talking on phone about playing badminton or something like that, we often see some ads like, okay, this badminton is for this cricket bat is for
Yeah,
this amount.
absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
this is the way they take our data and promote their own products and their own advertisement, right?
Not
So
only
coming,
phone calls, I should also be caution you and obviously our audience that when you're using personal assistants like Alexa, Google, all these devices, be very careful. Our phones, these devices, the smart devices, they are listening to us 24/7. They are profiling us. We just don't
absolutely,
realize it, right? But anyways, I don't want to be sounding too skeptic, but then,
yeah,
it's very important to be aware.
but that's the harsh truth. We can't
True, true,
deny it, right?
true.
So coming back to the show, Professor, compared to the earlier compliance regimes, how different is DPDP in terms of accountability, enforcement, and penalties? Because you know more in this. segment. So you will be the better person to answer this.
Thank you. Thank you so very much. So very quickly, things certainly have, I'm not using the word have, are expected to change because we are yet to see the implementation. Therefore, whatever I'm speaking with a pinch of salt, right? So under DPDPA, there are provisions for providing for accountability of data fiduciary. We have already talked about it. We have talked about the rights of the data principal, and I have also talked about corresponding liability, purpose limitation. So you say I am taking your data for the purpose of determining your credit score for your loan. Then if I take your data for that purpose, I cannot change it, right? I cannot use it for any other purpose. I cannot, so from that perspective, if you do as a data fiduciary, there'll be liability. So purpose limitation, data minimization, only the data which is required, is limited data is only required to be collected, nothing more, right? Consent management, the consent manager, that is, I think, the star or the key highlight of the DPDP is the consent manager. You know, I think that's the best provision they have been able to get under that, if it's effective. Again, big question, if it's effective, right? Notice requirement. So that's again, for consent, you have to, once a person has given consent and there is any change, anything, notice is to be there. Data breach notification, again, key. And interestingly, if you do not notify, there are penalties. Penalties to the extent of 250 crores. That's huge. Even if you are a big four, 250 crores is not less. However, we also have to wait and watch regarding the enforcement once the digital, data protection board of India is established, right? It has suo motu powers, but then the problem with Indian regulators is they very rarely use their suo motu powers. So we're expecting once this data protection board of India is established, it is working and acting in the interest of the data principles. That is something which we are expecting. Now let's see how it happens.
Absolutely. Just curious about to know from you, Professor, that 250 crores, if the data breaches are not being told or publicly told. So do
Up
you
to,
think?
I should say up to, yes.
So do you think that big four that you are talking about will, for example, there is a breach of 10,000 people. So do you think they will report, or they will just hide it from the media and all?
Absolutely. So they do it right now. They hide it right now. We are working on an online platform. How can we be so sure that this communication or your location and my location is not being compromised by the platform on which we are sitting? Absolutely. So, however, then comes the role of the regulator. That's what I said. Enforcement is the key. We make beautiful laws. We in India we are known for making beautiful laws, but the problem is implementation. Now there's a Data Protection Board of India. How it as a regulator is functioning, how it is able to protect the interest of the data principal and at the same time put liability or penalize the data fiduciary. They have to set just couple of examples. Just couple of examples. Everybody will fall in line. That's what has happened in Europe. Either you comply or you go. We don't want your services. We have to
Absolutely.
have a stronger stance.
We have to take stronger stance, right? So, Professor, in your experience, our organization in 2025 generally more towards the privacy mature nature, or than they were 5 years ago, or just about the documentation that we are talking about?
With a very heavy heart, I do have to state in India at present, it is nothing more than compliance. Right? I've just stated these corporates are not interested in protecting the interest of data principle. Well, they treat us as just a subject who would be able to help them sell their products or innovate their products. They're not bothered about our privacy or for that matter. They're just interested about compliance, regulatory compliance. They just want to show the world we have a good reputation. I refer to Apple, right? So Apple is saying privacy. Can any, or for that matter, WhatsApp is selling end-to-end encryption. Does that mean that encryption is not breakable, or does that mean the WhatsApp is not breaking that encryption? If it is not, how do we get the advertisements about the conversation we have on WhatsApp? As you just
Absolutely.
informed, when you speak something on phone, even if you talk about to your friend, I'm thinking of purchasing this and that for some time, All of a sudden, you go to a social media platform, you will be able to find similar advertisements. How is that happening? So these companies are not bothered about individuals. As an academic, I'm little critical, but then it's very important to show what's really happening outside.
Absolutely. That's very important to show what's happening in the real world, right? So,
Yeah.
Professor, have AI, big data, and algorithmic decision making accelerated or complicated the requirements for digital trust?
It certainly has. It certainly has. But then at the same time, I should also confess that we don't have regulation at this point of time. We don't have a regulatory framework. We can talk about EU AI Act of 2024. But other than, because we spoke about AI, algorithmic decision making, and big data. Now, from that perspective of regulation of, AI or, artificial agents, at present, we don't have anything. Even the EU AI Act is very, very limited to that extent, right? Now, these decision making, obviously, in India, we have just talked about AI ethics and accountability bill 2025, right? It is under scrutiny, but it's still, I think we'll have 10 other versions before, a final bill can actually be passed. I think it's still very basic. It needs to cover much aspects. From that perspective, even when you look at DPDPA, I'm little disappointed that DPDPA also does not talk about automated decision making. It does not talk about profiling, right? It does not talk about all algorithmic decision making. All these aspects which are covered in GDPR. We say that we copied from GDPR, but then, there are certain aspects, good aspects, which are there in GDPR, which either we have not provided or we are silent. So
Got it.
from that perspective, there is a long way from that perspective, and hopefully, in time to come, as and when we realize, with the changing environment, possibly the AI ethics and accountability bill, we'll have more changes in DPDP as well.
Absolutely. We will have some changes that are suggested by you as well. So, Professor, how must IT and data protection law evolve to address emerging technologies such as generative AI, biometric surveillance, and predictive analytics?
Now, it's a very, very interesting question that, see, we have to understand technology is evolving and it will keep on evolving. It will never
Yeah, it will
stop.
not stop. Yeah,
It will never stop. And if we over regulate, we will end up killing the technology. In fact, technological evolution is inversely proportional to regulation. So from that perspective, it these technological revolutions, their time has come. So an idea whose time has come, nobody can stop. So the time has come for these technologies, and nobody can stop them. The only thing which we require at this point of time is corporate restraint. That when these technologies are being put forward for public use, they should have certain SOPs and restraint. Just to give you a simple example, my area is crypto. So advertising standards of India, they themselves have come out with with certain rules regulations to restrict crypto advertisement. That for crypto advertisement we will do this, but we will not go beyond this. So from that perspective, corporate restraint is required, and hopefully, in time to come, we will be able to have that.
got it. So, Professor, are citizens today more willing to question how their data is collected and used, or does convenience is still outweigh concern?
Right? You can ask this question to all your audience, and everyone will say, I am just looking for convenience. Why do we have technology? To make my life easier. How the technology is using my data, I don't care. What, and you would be surprised to know most of us, what anybody will do with my data, why I would be important. So from that perspective, it's something which is innate in us. I have to, it has nothing to do with technology, it has nothing to do with law. It's sociological. How humans in India or citizens in India behave. They're not bothered about what's going to happen to my data. They will come forward and say, I have nothing to hide. I'm an open book, right? So they are not so concerned about. But then over a period of time, I should also point out that these Gen Gs, the millennials, the Gen Gs, they've started asserting themselves. The aspect of privacy, their personal data, non-interference. So there it's evolving. Awareness is there. But then for others, even though the awareness is there, they're not bothered about it.
Got it. So, Professor, I will not take more of your time. We will be just discussing two more questions. So,
Sure.
do you foresee India moving from a checkbox style compliance model towards a genuinely trust-based digital governance framework?
It's it's a very interesting question, but I tell you, I don't think there'll be a major change because we just talked about corporates are more bothered about documentation. Now, whether that documentation is taking place directly through the data principle or now through consent managers, the situation will not change. Earlier, what was happening? Directly, individuals they were doing checkbox, and then they accept and their consent is there. Now, the same thing will be done through consent managers. But I don't able to see for foreseeable future things will substantially change. They will remain the same. It's just the tools will change. Earlier it was just checkbox. Now it will be, content consent managers. But things will change as far as I'm able to see. But we'll see what with time we'll get to know.
Yeah, time will tell us it's a positive change or it's the same.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely, absolutely.
Professor, coming to the final question here. So, my question is that beyond DPDP Act, what do you believe is the next critical evolution India needs to truly strengthen digital trust?
Oh, I think there are several of them. I think DPDP is just a beginning. It's really just a beginning. I've just talked about it. We need to amend our IT Act. It has to be replaced by Digital India Act or whatever you name it. IT Act has to be replaced, completely refurbished, and a new structure has to come. AI governance framework, I think that's the need of the hour. We don't. We don't want to kill the technology, but at the same time, you know, see, at the end of the day, anything is a tool. A knife can be used for vegetables, but also used for murder. Similarly, AI can be used for good, but then at the same time, it can also be used for morphing, deep faking, right? So that regulation is required. Then crypto, my area. So, I have to bring in. So crypto regulation is again something which we really have to look at, you know, and non-personal data regulation, which I talked about very briefly earlier. That is the other aspects which have to be considered, and accordingly, their regulatory framework should be developed over a period of time.
Absolutely. We will be seeing certain changes in the coming future, which will be, I think, heading India to a positive framework.
Yeah, yeah.
So, first of all, very, very thank you, Professor. Any final words for our audience so that after that we can just wrap it up? Any final
Right.
words from your
Just
end?
I'll like to say that digital trust is something which you have to personally be cautious about. Nobody is gonna come and protect you. Like we say, even in physical space, when you go outside, you take care of your own goods, right? Similarly, when you're on cyberspace, you have to ensure your digital trust. You have to be more cautious, more aware about what is happening around you. So from that perspective, awareness and presence is extremely important.
Absolutely, Professor. Professor, thank you so much for tuning into Secured Apps, as well as Secure CMS LinkedIn channel. And to our viewers, this was all on data privacy decoded. Professor Abhinav Gupta was the best person to answer all your questions that you guys have put on. So thank you very much, Professor. It was a pleasure to have you here. And thank you, Secured App team. This was Kunal Chaudhary signing off. Hope you liked this video. If you did so, please hit the like button, share this video with your friends, families, and colleagues. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, Secured App. Like our LinkedIn handle, Secured App, as well as Secure CMS. We will be definitely seeing you next time. But till then, stay safe, stay secure, and as always, I say, stay ahead. Thank you, Professor. Thank you so much.
Thank you so very much for inviting me. Thank you.